Morning to everyone. We only have three members currently present, but I'm hoping that another one or two will hop in here in the short term. I will say, kind of disappointingly, the group has gotten a little bit smaller. Sheila was not with us last month or last meeting or this one, and actually sent a resignation letter in, and so we have lost Sheila. That does leave us with a few vacancies on the Budget Advisory Council. We'll talk about those a little bit further down the agenda. But what it unfortunately kind of does for us is there are three of you and there are only five sitting members, which allows you to be a quorum. So to that end, one of the first things on the agenda was actually to approve the minutes from the prior meeting, which are kind of short in nature. We did go through some charts and had some discussions again with the fire chief. If anybody has any corrections or edits to those minutes, otherwise, Fred, I would take a motion to approve those minutes so they can be appended to your report.
Move to approve.
Second.
Everybody raise your right hand or say aye. Looks like he said already said aye. We'll take that. All right, we will call those approved. Thank you very much. Moving on to the agenda, so we've substantially got two things today. One is the city council received the proposed budget last week in presentation, and I'm not sure who Tony and Charlie is. I'm going to admit someone and then make sure that's Tony. Tony, is that you joining the meeting? All right, I'm going to hope that's the case. But two things on the agenda today. One, looking at the proposed budget. So I would tell you and the public generally, if you want to see the longer presentation that was given to City Council, the city's YouTube page or via the agenda system, you can go watch the whole presentation that was given to City Council and the discussion that they had. What we normally do for the CBAC is try and condense that down into something slightly more manageable and hit the high points and get rid of a few of the lower points. So I'm going to go through that presentation. I'm going to share it here up on the screen, make sure that we all see it. And then what I will tell you is cut me off at any point to ask any questions you have. The second thing on the agenda is to go through recommendations. You have already seen the draft one, but what you didn't see draft recommendations for were things related to the budget. It is always within the scope of CBAC's annual work plan to look at the manager's proposed budget and make any recommendations or comments that you have on that. And so it would be appropriate to add those along with the ones we have been discussing for fire. So I'm going to go ahead and try and share this and hope that it works correctly. Okay, let me do that in presentation mode. Janice, are we still seeing it? Yes, we're good, Fred.
Yes, we're good.
Rock through there, and it's changing as well. Okay. So again, I'm going to kind of hit the high points that City Council saw, but don't hesitate to unmute or hit the icon. Let me know you've got a question. And someone on staff will hopefully alert me to that. At a very, very high level, we show the overall budget has increased. And what we tell people is the overall budget includes operations and capital, and it can go up or down. If you looked at the budget last year when we were talking, the budget actually went down because of some capital things. And so it's up this year. The next slide, we'll talk about the main drivers, but you can see their operating costs up a little less than 8%. Debt service, we'll talk about. There's a really big balloon payment there. And then capital year to year is about the same. But an overall $659 million budget for the city. So $51 million year to year. What's really driving the change? So there is if you've listened to the city manager, one of the highest priorities for him coming in from City Council was to ensure that we are well placed in the market in terms of compensating our employees. And so there is roughly $15.5 million of that $51 million that is related to a compensation study that is effective in October, which means only 3/4 of that compensation study is actually included in the 25 budget. There'd be a lingering 3 months of it that would roll into the next budget as well because of the timing. I told you about that leasing fund balloon payment. So you see it there at $18 million, why debt expenses were going up. We have an internal leasing fund that we use for vehicle acquisition. And the way the debt is issued for that is to have these giant balloon payments. So what you'll see next year is a slide that says probably negative $18 million change on the capital side. It's just a debt timing thing. And then going down the list, debt service fund, we paid off some debt last year, some general government debt. So our P&I payments or principal and interest are a little lower. Vehicles and equipment acquisition. Again, the manager, one of his top priorities is kind of core services. So I'll show you a slide where we're a little bit behind on some of our vehicle replacement schedule. We've been trying to catch up for 2 or 3 years. We're still a little behind. Part of that's even the ones that we have budgeted. We've had some logistical issues in getting them actually delivered. But this budget continues and amplifies trying to get on an adequate replacement schedule so that we're giving city employees the equipment they need to do the jobs they're supposed to do every day. Transit is one. We'll talk about that specifically as well, but city council approved a contract for a new transit provider in May, I believe. And that transit provider is going to hopefully provide a much better service and reinstate night and weekend services that are not currently taking place because of driver shortages, and the current vendor can't get some positions filled. But that is a $7 million increase, and you'll see an increase in the tax rate that is directly related to transit. And then water and sewer is a really large fund. It's not surprising to see water and sewer operations going up $6 million. But those are the major drivers at a very high level of kind of that change from year to year. Got a couple of slides here on kind of what are the major taxes and fees change? What does that look like for what we're going to call the average resident? But really, there are 3.9 cents for the general fund in terms of an increase in the tax rate, and 2.5 to transit. If you add that together, that's a tax rate increase of 6.4 cents, which is in some ways higher than what we have been looking at and doing in the past. Again, that 2.5 cents is for a contract that was already approved by city council. And so we told them when they approved the contract that was coming. The 3.9 cents you see there is really related to that compensation study, a vehicle acquisition, and then there are a few other things, albeit in the fire department, that we are going to talk about that are probably directly related to some of your recommendations in your report that managed to make their way into the manager's proposed budget during the cycle while you were talking about them. And as we discussed at our last meeting, I told you don't be surprised if you see some of them. So there are a few of them there, and we'll talk about them. But water and sewer rates at 7% increase to keep up with a lot of the capital maintenance and expansion that they need to do. Stormwater rates, this is the second year after not having raised them for 15 years that we have an increase in the stormwater rate. And then the motor vehicle privilege fee. Per state law, we are allowed to be at $30 per vehicle. We had been at 15 for a very long time. In this budget, it is increased from the $15 to 30, and that is used exclusively for street resurfacing. It generates about an extra $2.8 million a year. Street resurfacing, as you remember from prior years when we've talked about the resident survey data, is the single highest, or I guess lowest maybe, lowest perceived satisfaction that we have amongst city services every year. And so the highest priority and the lowest satisfaction. So city council has a proposed budget that looks at increasing the motor vehicle privilege tax and directing that directly to street resurfacing in just under $3 million a year.
Scott, can I ask a few questions about this slide?
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, let's start with the motor vehicle. Is this going to increase the money available for street resurfacing, or will it replace general operating funds that go towards street resurfacing?
It is increasing it by $2.8 million.
So nothing's being taken away, it's just going to increase it.
Yes.
Okay. Second question, the stormwater rates, I thought the water rates hadn't been raised in quite some time. Is it intended that this will go up every year, or is this sort of like finishing up sort of a lag of not raising it for a while?
So the water and sewer rates generally go up every year. Now, during COVID, they didn't go up a year or two, which was kind of an anomaly.
But I'm misremembering, sorry.
Yeah, water and sewer rates pre-COVID would have been increasing probably in the 4 to 8% range generally. They do there's a lot with the facilities, the plants and the pipes that are in the ground that they do in terms of asset management and capital maintenance and replacement. And a lot of that covers that. Stormwater was the one we hadn't raised in 15 years. And so we did 8% in the current year. This is proposed 8% for next year. And then the pro forma shows 4% each year thereafter. So we are catching up for many years of not having raised it. And there are going to be some discussions about, I'm sure y'all live in the community and you see all of the culvert failures that are happening. We're having a lot of reactive maintenance issues coming up throughout the year. And so as those continue to come up and the larger ones like Bethabara Road that are hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, you have to adequately fund this. So there are some questions about whether to cash fund capital projects, or we may be looking at debt issuances that may help smooth out some of the rate increases over time. But those discussions are forthcoming.
Okay. I suspected the answer would be something like that. Last question. Is it, this is just curiosity. Is the transit fund, like, is that a dedicated fund for the property taxes, goes straight to that and can't be touched for other things, or is it just a name you give it?
So it is an enterprise fund for us, and we direct a portion of the tax rate directly to it that goes into that fund for transit purposes. It covers the operations, and it covers our grant matches for bus replacement, facility renovations, and that kind of stuff. So we don't transfer money out of the transit fund back to any other fund. I think what you'll see as we get a little further in this is that 2.5 cents is to cover this massive increase in the contract cost, but it actually doesn't plug fully the hole that exists there, and that fund actually needs additional funding in future years.
Okay.
So,
John, I have a question in
yes, ma'am.
reference to what Fred just said about the transit fund property
Mhm.
tax. In that fund, is there, well, within the contract itself, since we're switching contractors, the previous contractors, is there any penalty because of their failure?
So
Do
that is
they?
a tricky question, and one that I would have to punt to our DOT folks. I don't know. The new contract has both penalties and rewards in it. I don't know
Okay.
that the old one was written the same way, and it was written, golly, I want to say like 10 years ago or more.
Okay.
I don't think that we have as much recourse to go backwards and say, because you're not filling those positions and meeting the revenue hours, that we can withhold payments. But that stuff is written into the future contract, where if they miss specific goals, then their payments do go down. Or if they exceed the goals, they also there are again amounts in there for them have exceeding the goals as well.
Okay. And this would be the standard for us to make sure going forward that we would have those requirements listed into a contract.
That is going forward. I would presume that they would continue to do that. The RATP Dev contract, who is the new provider, is a 5-year contract with
Okay.
2 extensions. So that would be in place for the next 5 to 7 years. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Continuing on to the next slide. So when we talk about those taxes and fees, what does it really look like for the average person or the median household? So property taxes, our current median residential tax value is just under $146,000. So with the increases that we showed you at 6.4 cents, that's roughly $93 a year in property taxes. For the average water and sewer user, that would be about $42 a year. Stormwater would be $4 a year difference. And then again, $30 on a $30 on a 2 vehicle family. To about $170 a year is what the average or median family would see, which equates to just over $14 a month in increased property taxes and fees. The way that works out, if you take our proposed rates and compare them to the other 4 largest cities, we are significantly below Greensboro, Charlotte, Raleigh, and Durham in terms of what we charge our residents for those services. The property tax one you can see is the bottom dark blue, and you see us at $1,055. Go over and compare to Greensboro, who is our neighbor, at $1,567. Even though our tax rates are similar and our proposed tax rate is actually higher than theirs, I'm going to show you on the next slide. That goes back to median property tax value and where we are in our revaluation cycle. You can see on the water and sewer side, we are the second lowest. Greensboro is about 20 or 30 bucks behind us. And then in terms of the other taxes and fees, some of the other cities, particularly Charlotte and Raleigh is charging a lot for their mandatory solid waste fees annually. And so this includes property taxes, water, motor vehicle privilege tax, water, sewer, and stormwater. So if you are the median household in Winston-Salem, even with the 6.4 cent proposed tax rate increase, you're paying a lot less than these other cities are.
Let me ask this question. Why are we so much lower than these other cities?
So the real answer, so there's two questions hidden in there. One is, why are we lower in terms of the charge? The other is, are they doing anything differently than we are? Those are kind of two questions, and I'm not sure which one you were intending to ask, Ross, but I'll kind of answer both of them. The next
Okay.
slide is our values. So if you look at this chart, this is the median residential tax value. You see Winston-Salem down there at 145,500. Our last revaluation was in fiscal year 22. We're going to have one next year, and the county tax office has told us you can expect to see substantial increases in residential tax values, somewhere maybe potentially north of 40%. Now, if you raise the tax values, then you can lower the rate, kind of thing. But that's all the decision for council in terms of where the tax rate is set. But when you look at like our median tax value compared to Greensboro's, whose is I mean 60% higher than us, that means at the same tax rate on a residential side, they're generating 60% more revenue than we are because their value is that much higher. Again, they revaled 2 years ago, and you see up here, Durham is due for one. They're 75% above us. They're going to reval next year. Greensboro is actually going to do their revaluation again next year because they messed up the one that they did 2 years ago and actually did values too low, and the state is requiring them to redo it. Raleigh, as you can see, fiscal year 25 actually had a revaluation this year, and Charlotte had one last year. But this is kind of a very interesting and stark chart when you look at from a tax value perspective. Our median home is worth $145,000 compared to 60% more in Greensboro and 160 to 170% more in Raleigh and Charlotte. Again, part of this is timing related. So when we come back next year, this number will jump substantially. But when you see this chart, even if our tax rate is higher, that's why our taxes are the same or lower property taxes than everyone else, is because the value of the home is low.
Okay.
So I don't want to belabor that, but this is something that we have been showing publicly and wanted to make y'all aware of. Moving on, there are a couple of user fee changes, even other than those high level ones that we wanted to make you aware of. The chart on the left is just, we are updating some pretty old planning and development services fees related to inspections and permitting. You can see some of those haven't changed since 2004, 2013, 2015, so 9 and 10 plus years. And then I would draw your attention over here specifically to your work plan this year under the fire side. We do have a new initial periodic inspection fee. So all of the level 1, level 2, and level 3 inspections that Chief Mayo was telling you about, all of those inspections, we are the only major city in North Carolina not charging for those. So going into this fiscal year, we're going to start charging a fee of $50, which is actually lower than what several of our other peers are charging. And we've changed some of the violations and reinspection fees as well. All of that generates enough revenue to hire 3 additional inspector positions to get through that backlog Trey was telling you about, and to set us up to have enough capacity to not get into another position where we have a backlog for many years. So the budget includes adding positions. The only positions in the budget added are those 3 inspectors, and we're covering them with increased revenues in the fire department. Also, just over here by itself, this $2 per foot linear foot of roadway. Engineering looked out again a lot of our peers, and they're charging for planning or development fees kind of in that range of $1.50 to $3 per linear foot for subdivisions and those types of things. And so we're instituting that as a cost recovery mechanism we've not had in the past.
What is that? What is that fund?
What does this fund?
Yeah, like why does it exist? I know nothing about this, so.
If you want to, there's an entire, obviously development review cycle. So if you're a developer and you want to build a subdivision, you're going to come in and say, I'm going to build this many houses. There's going to be this much roadway. Our engineering department is one of the primary functions to come in and look at how is that road designed. how does it leak into, or how does it connect to the other road network? So when anyone wants to build a new, in any type of new infrastructure into the community, engineering is the first place that they're going to go. And so that $2 per linear foot helps us cover the cost of really reviewing the design of that new development. It's not full cost recovery. So full cost recovery would be, I think, the $3 or a little more per linear foot. So we didn't move it all the way up as some of the other jurisdictions do, but it's really to cover the engineering and design review of new assets in the community as they come on. We've got to make sure when roads are built, we've got to make sure they're built to our standard. We've got to make sure that sidewalks are appropriately backed off, all that kind of stuff, the setbacks, all that kind of stuff. Yep. So we talked about employee compensation. There is a comp and class study currently being handled. It has not been completed yet, but at a high level, I showed you it's about $15.5 million across the entire organization for 9 months of that. We're going to have new pay plans for everybody. Again, there was a huge market study done by an outside consultant. What the study includes is a base 4% increase for all employees who are within the new salary ranges and who meet minimum performance appraisal requirements. We are, again, changing the new minimums, and because of the vacancies we've had, and I've got, I think, one chart on that. Some of the minimums in this market study are going to go up 2, 3, 4%. Some of them may go up 8, 10, 12%. It really just depends on the position type. We would expect that, the positions that were really struggling, maybe engineers and fleet techs and those type of things, are probably going to go up higher than some of the positions like a planner that we're keeping filled constantly. But again, we haven't completed that, and it hasn't been fully released yet, but we did need to tell council what's in there. We'll also include some adjustments, compression adjustments based on tenure, so that everybody's not compressed down at the bottom of the pay plan. And then the recommendation from the consultant is to move our minimum wage to $17.96 per hour. I think we're actually just going to make it an even 18 to make it easier on everybody. But that is generally what's kind of in for compensation for city employees. Did have some vacancy rate information here. This is from March, so this is a little data is a couple of months old, but you can see there we've still got several departments of more than 25 positions who have vacancy rates 16% all the way up to 36%. You can see the note on the bottom right there. Field operations, fleet, and engineering actually have vacancy rates as of March are higher this year than they were last year. So not only are we struggling to fill those, but we actually have higher rates of vacancy than we did 12 months prior. I will say organizationally, we have brought the full vacancy rate down a couple of percentage points. I don't think I have that chart, but generally pre-COVID, we were looking in probably the 10% range for total vacancy in the organization, and we're currently in the 15 to 16 range. So we still have quite a high vacancy rate compared to where we want to be. So general fund is the biggest component of the budget that council deals with in looking at policy and tax rate setting. So wanted to show you the more detailed slides for the general fund and where it is. We've kind of talked about personnel here, so you can see the numbers in the table, but I would draw your attention to the bullet points. So we've talked about the comp and class study. We've talked about minimum wage going to $18 an hour. I've already hit on those 3 firefighters for which we have increased revenues. So here was the other one. You guys have heard from Trey and have recommendations in your report. The proposed budget includes an additional $2.4 million in overtime pay for fire operations. And so Chief Mayo told you that he is running a significant amount of overtime. We have added that overtime to the budget, but what we have said is that is for what he is currently doing to make sure that we can keep the stations open and operating with minimum staffing needs. But we're going to look at what is the best plan long-term for how to use that money. And the answer is most likely some combination of increasing his authorized positions and using that money to hire recruit classes earlier to keep more people full-time on the companies and on the street. So that $2.4 million should solve the problem for us. and we will most likely be looking at and changing the strategy away from using a lot of overtime to figuring out how to appropriately staff those vehicles so that he doesn't have the 30 vacancies that he's told you about right now. So if we run those recruit classes earlier, you graduate them earlier, you don't have as many on-street vacancies. That's what we'll be trying to get away from. And then just one note down there at the bottom that we are maintaining the vast majority of city benefits by using a little bit of cash. If you see the benefits costs look like they're going down, that's just a result. We've got some cash reserves in some of our benefits funds, and so we're going to use a little bit of our cash reserves so the general fund doesn't pay quite as much for benefits in 25. On the non-personnel side, and I've got one more slide that goes into a lot of detail, but just wanted to hit on, so you see about a $7 million increase in supplies and services, which is a catch-all for basically non-personnel operating. I did want to show you this $3.7 million in lease payments. So when we talked about vehicles being one of the main budget drivers, that shows up as a lease payment in the general fund because we lease things over 5 years. 4 million of this is in the fire department. Chief told you about his self-contained breathing apparatus. So we do have $4 or maybe even $4.1 million in cash to replace all of that breathing apparatus that is meeting the 10-year replacement criteria. We'll also note those 2 bullet points at the bottom. We are still behind, as I mentioned earlier, on vehicle replacement. Roughly 33% of the fleet is outside replacement criteria. And a note that we are continuing to see increasing costs on vehicle acquisition. Police cars, fire trucks, sanitation vehicles are all increasing at a rate or budgeted rate of more than 10% from what we had last year. So it's not just that we're behind on vehicles and we're trying to catch up. It's also that the cost of those vehicles is escalating in a way that it wasn't 4 or 5 years ago, where we're seeing 10+% increase in vehicle acquisition cost every year. So in terms of the little bit further down into the weeds on what some of that $6 or $7 million of non-personnel was, again, you see up at the top that $4 million for self-contained breathing apparatus. The next thing on there is a transfer to the fairgrounds and Bowman Gray Stadium. The fairgrounds and Bowman Gray Stadium have been running operating losses for a few years, and they have essentially run out of cash in those funds. And so the general fund is picking up the deficit, the operating deficit that they're running. This is something we talked to you about last year, have told council about for almost 2 years coming, and it's finally happening. We do have about $800,000 for street lighting. A portion of that is to transition all of our street lights to LEDs or light emitting diodes, which is significantly more environmentally friendly and costs us less in the long term. But the vast majority of that $800,000 is actually Duke Energy's just raising the rates on us. We pay millions of dollars a year for street lighting, and when they raise the rates, just like when we have to pay it at home, the city has to pay those rate increases as well. I won't go through all of these. I'll pick out a couple. You do see a couple of things in police. Police is the largest general fund department, so they have a lot of inflation in their contracts. We do have new mowing contracts coming online. So when we built that wonderful US 52 and Research Parkway interchange, NCDOT landscaped it for a year, but the agreement now comes to us, and we are required to continue with the Research Parkway landscaping. You do see down there the drone as a first responder program. So we do have a program that police is looking into that would make us one of the first in the country using drones as a first responder. So that is kind of in strategic planning, looking at some of that kind of 21st century law enforcement. And then you do see, I wanted to note the thing down at the bottom. We had a much better leaf season this year. Part of that leaf season was we hired some additional temps to help get the leaves up faster. That seemed to work, and so that's included in next year's budget as well. But you've got kind of the details there on the non-personnel side, totaling up to about $8 million.
Hey, Scott, I don't know, this made me think of something. Well, if you're going to toss. So the BEAR program, is that still being funded from grants, or is that in the operating, or is it gone, or what?
So it is still being, it is in the operating budget, but it is funded by the opioid settlement funds that we're getting. And almost, I think 100% of it this year by opioid settlement. That'll drop off next year. We had a big spike in how much opioid settlement money we got. What we've told folks is that opioid settlement money comes in and it has very specific purposes it can be used for. And the Bear team response actually fits very well into one of those purposes. And if it wasn't for Bear, we might actually struggle a little bit to figure out what we were going to spend that money on, or may even talk about partnering with the county, letting them have part of it, because a lot of it is social services based or health services based, which they provide. So it is right now basically 100% funded by opioid funds. We did get, or are in the process of getting, an expansion of the Bear program through a federal grant that Representative Kathy Manning was able to help us get. We have not, you get the award notification for that, then you technically have to apply for it and get it. So we are several months away from actually getting that money and being able to scale it up. But at that point, that too will be on a grant. I believe there is a very high commitment from the city council to continue funding Bear with ongoing operating resources when it becomes necessary to do that. So, but right now it is grant funded, basically. Won't talk too much about vehicle replacement, as we've done it there, but we do have quite a few fire trucks. 4 fire trucks in the budget is a lot for 1 year. We try not to have more than 2 in the budget. They have gotten older, and we're also seeing those increased timelines. Chief Mayo told you it takes 3 or 4 years to get a fire truck in. So if we wait 3 or 4 years to order it, we're in trouble. So we're trying to get a few of those in a little faster. We do have 78 police vehicles and are still working on getting hybrids. You will see, I'll let this out of the bag, there are, I think, 20 hybrids on the list for council to approve in June. So we are trying to convert to some of those alternative fuel vehicles and continuing that in the FY25 budget. In terms of things not in the budget, we've talked about this before, and kind of Trey and his folks coming and having the work plan we had this year was probably a result of something I showed you like this 2 years ago, Fred, that you got really interested in. But at a very high level, we want to let council know we're talking about a 6.4 tax rate increase. The budget office didn't just let everything, let the floodgates open and fund everything. There's a lot of stuff that we don't have in the budget. Personnel requests. So we have from departments an additional $7 million worth of requests. Again, a lot of that is related to the fire department and what he's told you about, but we do have a significant number of them from recreation and other departments as well. Additional operating requests totaling $3 million. And we have not really tackled the affordable housing issue in this budget. There is an affordable housing seminar is the wrong word, but there's a large community meeting coming on affordable housing in the fall, and a strategic planning session coming in January, where the council is really going to look at how do we as a community want to look at what we do for affordable housing and provide resources for it. And I put street resurfacing here. And so, Fred, this goes back to your question. We added $2.8 million to street resurfacing, but there is still a deficit of $5 million annually to get to a 30-year resurfacing cycle.
I remembered there being some incredibly large amount. That's why I asked the question.
So,
yeah.
So we are taking a step in the right direction, but it is a human-sized step, not a giant step. So that's all for general fund. There are a couple of things I wanted to show you. So we talked about the 2.5 cents for WISTA or the transit fund. Even with that 2.5 cents, this is what the financial projection looks like. The reason for this is that 2.5 cents covers the $7 million contractor increase. So they said they would come in, they're going to be $7 million more. That 2.5 cents covered it. This is kind of what the projection looked like before the contractor. It made it a little worse because it was a little more expensive. But you can see in fiscal year 25, the projected use of $5 million or more in fund balance. And if we don't do something in 26, we would have negative cash. So council will come into the fiscal year 26 budget deliberations next year, knowing that they've got to make some changes to the transit fund. And those could be a series of revenue enhancements or service level or expenditure reductions. That is going to be one of the major things on council's radar, again, going into the fall and winter for strategic planning, to think about how do we want to provide services and what is the appropriate level. I will send you the PowerPoint. There's a lot of notes here just to what's on that chart, but we hit the high level. And the other one I wanted to show you was stormwater management. Fred, you asked kind of about the rate. So fiscal year 25 includes 8%. Even with 4% increases in the following 3 years, you see this massive dive in funds. There is a lot of capital out there. This assumes funding it all in cash. It just depends on how many more emergency projects come online as to how quickly we would spend some of that. And then this kind of goes down and up and down a couple more times the further you go out. But those are the discussions we're going to have about the stormwater fund is how long is it taking to get some of those projects done, and how do we want to fund them to make sure that the fund stays solvent and meets all of its debt requirements for the next 5 years, because we've still got 5 years worth of debt service payments for revenue bonds we issued previously. Oh Lord, Janice, thank you for that. So let me see if I can let James see it. There we go. Thank you, Janice. And again, the next slide has just some of those notes there that we talked about at a super, super high level. That is the budget in a nutshell. Again, if you want to see a little bit more of the minutia and watch the budget director talk about property tax base and sales tax increases or decreases and that kind of stuff, there's about 15 or 20 more slides that we gave the city council, but we've really hit the high points here. So what I would say is, the next thing on the agenda is to discuss the draft report. But again, there are a couple of highlights for, do you want to provide any recommendations or really even commentary on this proposed budget in terms of expenditures, tax increases, fees increases, or anything like that? And Jamesine, I am very sorry if you were sitting out there for a while and I didn't catch you. I had my screen shared, so Janice popped up and I let you in.
Scott, I have a question, and depending on your answer, will probably lead to a recommendation to include to the council.
Okay.
Earlier, when Chief Mayo was talking about the reason why we have high insurance premiums because of our ISOs, is it any way that we could show council what our insurance rates are on the average and what they could be if we can decrease that response time, and to show what it could look like, or a possibility of what it could look like, to help guide their decision into making the necessary changes so we can reduce their response time. And
So-
also to include them into the decision making when it comes to building up having new developments, making sure that there's a proper road, there's a proper water. I can't even think what you call it, what they need as firemen to get to those spaces when there's an emergency. The fire hydrants. I don't know why I couldn't think of fire hydrants.
Yeah, two things to that. So you do have a recommendation that talks about, particularly as Chief was looking at some of the response areas, Meadowlark was one of them, where we have longer response times in terms of adding additional resources for that. I had a conversation with one of the deputy fire chiefs actually this weekend on accident. And we are up for accreditation, but also up for a relook at ISO, and there is a potential that our ISO might increase for the vast majority of the city. And again, it's not just fire suppression. There's the water component of it. There's the planning piece of it. Being an
Right.
accredited fire organization actually gives you a little bit of a bump too, because they know that you're looking at things. I don't know that we'll fully get there, but your recommendations around looking at additional resources for those areas that have lower response times would probably be what council's looking at. Now, I know Fred probably unmuted here. It's could we show them if ISO goes up, premiums go down? And Trey talked about that, and we looked into it, and I don't have a white paper or a report anywhere that shows that. I do know through talking to some agents and doing some review, at least one of the major insurance carriers, it was either Allstate or State Farm, doesn't even use ISO in their premiums at all. And so some of them use a different methodology now than they used to. I know Chief Mayo had looked at that when he was doing something a while back, and I would guess there probably is something to it. I don't have anything that I can present to council that says, if you got here, the average premium would drop this amount. I would have that conversation with the manager if he wanted us to try and get more intentional about collecting that data. But that's a research project that we don't have currently scoped, and Janice and I were not able to do some research and really come up with yeah, there's something out there that really shows exactly this is how it would happen. Um, I understand that, and I'm more than happy to add some additional language to one of those recommendations that we're looking at, if you'd like to go that route. But I don't have anything I can put in front of council that I'd be comfortable saying, if you increase these resources, absolutely, we would go to an ISO1, and absolutely you would see, people would see decreases in their residential um, um, premiums for property insurance. The other issue is it would probably be, and I hate to say this, it wouldn't be a decrease in your property insurance. It would be a kind of lower net increase. Anybody that's had to go out and get new property insurance recently, the way the rates are rising, we'd really have to get nuanced and show people that. I couldn't find anything that said, 8% reduction, 5% reduction, that kind of thing. But we can continue to work with the fire chief and see if anybody has done anything like that more recently. I think the only thing I found was from like 1998, and that's a little dated at this point. So,
Okay, all right, thanks.
yes, ma'am. Fred, sorry. So apologies for not being able. I know that's something
You
that
anticipate my
I've asked a couple
question, it's
times.
fine.
Yeah.
I do have other questions if it's, so you have the summary of the report on the fire stuff. Some of that's clearly in the budget. Some of it clearly is not. Some is, I don't know. Like, is there any way to get a projection of like what the cost would be for the things that aren't already in the budget? So it makes no sense to be like, here's the report and like, oh yeah, you already paid for this part, It's like, just to get ideas to, to upgrade to the point that the fire chief would like, what that would cost. I just don't have a good sense for that.
So basically looking at your recommendations, just putting a dollar amount next to
And crossing out the things that have already been funded, or at least acknowledging, thank you guys have already proposed funding this, so it doesn't look kind of silly, like we're asking them, hey, can you replace the scuba? Oh, wait, you guys are already doing that. It's like,
So what I would say there, Fred, if you are comfortable with it, what we might try to do is have in this meeting, y'all approve the report. Janice and I will do our best to come up with some numbers for those. And then as you present to Finance Committee on Tuesday, we might have that as part of the presentation of, here is what's out there, here are the recommendations that don't appear to be in the budget, and these are the potential price tags for those in the future.
I am personally perfectly comfortable with that as long as the rest of the committee is.
Is everyone else okay with that generally?
Yeah, it sounds good.
Yes.
Okay. Very good. So we should be able to put some things. There'll probably be some footnotes on it, Fred. That's why I don't want to throw it in the official report, because some of those are very dependent upon how many resources you put somewhere, and if you're going to build a fire station, what the average assumption of the cost of that fire station is that we wouldn't build for a couple of years, kind of thing. But yeah, we can do some of that. Absolutely.
Can we move on to the to that specific fire document?
Sure, absolutely. And I can share the PDF of it if you would like, so that everybody's looking at the same page here. No, I thought I was going to. Share.
Oh, actually, something else. I'm sorry. Before we do that, that I was going to ask earlier. This new contractor for the transit, are they going to be doing any updating and things like pay? Well, like right now, if you want to take the bus, you either have to have a pass or pay in cash, which is really annoying because I never have a dollar. Is there talk of modernizing this so we might be able to use a credit card or anything like that, or is that even not in discussion?
That is absolutely in the discussion. So they are going to come in on August 1st and take over the transit system. So that does not mean on August 2nd, we're going to have pay by app.
Well,
they are actually pushing that very hard.
Oh, sweet.
For us to modernize. So some of that's going to take, there's got to be some infrastructure built for it. There are questions about collections and do you transition completely away from cash collections entirely and go only to online collection? So a lot of that's got to be worked out. But yes, absolutely, that is being discussed. I would tell you, you're probably not going to see it in the first 6 months that the provider is there, but you'll hear city council probably talking about it here in the next 6 months.
Well, that'd be awesome. Anyway, sorry, now back to the fire.
Yep, sorry. All right, let me try and share this again. I hope I've got it to the correct page. Is everyone seeing, what are you seeing?
Yeah.
a Word document? Yes, okay, good.
I'm seeing a PDF with all the recommendations. Yeah.
Yeah, oh, sorry, yes, it's a PDF, yeah. So the top of the document kind of has a distillation of the minutes and what was talked about, and then these are the individual recommendations, 1 through 10, and then again, you see the budget recommendations we've highlighted. So I guess we can walk through these one by Fred. Do you want to walk through them one by one?
So I do have a kind of a sort of a kind of a big picture thing here.
Okay,
The way they're displayed to me is kind of almost backwards in the
Okay.
sense, makes no sense to hire people if you don't have the facility or the equipment. So to me, it'd be, I would put the equipment, then the facility, then the switch equipment and staff. Just because the equipment seems like, when I heard about that, that seemed like a, wow, this is dangerous. As well, the staffing seems like something more long-term. That's
Okay.
just my recommendation, is to switch those two so the equipment comes before the facility. Just
Okay.
thinking about terms of what seems more alarming.
Okay, so equipment, facilities, and then staffing.
That'd be my suggestion.
Okay. Anyone on CBAC? We have general agreement about that, so not changing the language, but just changing the order of that.
Sounds good.
Okay. We will make that change generally. Anything else specific to the wording in these? Again, we kind of talked through them a little bit last month, but you're seeing them in full narrative form the last couple of weeks for the first time.
Well, so just to clarify, under the staffing, the first one is already being taken care of by additional fee revenue, right?
Yep.
Okay. The second one is at least being taken care of for the next year by the overtime funding, right?
Yep.
The third is definitely more long-term.
Yes.
And the reason why it says could lead to a reduction instead of should lead is because you haven't found a definitive source.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
So you should be
And then-
very careful with those conditional statements when we send things.
That's
to
why
council.
I was going to recommend the change until you said that.
Yep.
Then if we go down to the equipment recommendation,
Mhm.
9 is already been taken, is being taken care of, right?
Yes.
You did mention stuff about replacing of vehicles on a time frame and stuff. Is that affecting 8 and 10, or 8 and 10 in addition to what's already being proposed for next year?
So we're taking a step in the fiscal year 25 budget towards getting to 8 and 10. So what really 8 is creating a long-term schedule for fire apparatus replacement, and then also I guess pulling that schedule in because of lead times. So we are replacing some stuff that's old to try and get on schedule. But what 8 is really in our current vehicle replacement policy, I think fire trucks are 12 to 15 years. Trey does not want them to be 12 to 15. He wants them to be 10, I think. So there are some conversations around what is the best practice for replacing a pumper, and then really setting aside funds to make sure that in every year you've got, if it's 10 years, you've got 1/10 of the need set aside every year. So we're in the budget putting enough money to move in that direction, but we have not set
Okay.
up a new sinking fund to actually make this happen or anything like
Okay.
that. And then 10 is kind of the same thing, but instead of with apparatus, with a lot of their other large scale equipment replacement, if you know it lasts 10 years or 5 years, with the SCBA, don't wait till year 10 and then search for $4 million in cash, set some of that aside as you go along, kind of thing. So. Other issues, questions, comments, concerns about the report itself or any of the language there included? And Fred, this is your report. I mean, if you wanted to use should instead of could there.
No, no.
Okay.
Until you said the reason, until you answered Aseta's question, I was all for that, but now it makes perfect sense to say could. Yes.
So hearing no other major issues.
Though I will say, I know I've said this before, Scott, if you could actually get data on that, that could be useful, not necessarily for the city council, but to make it a little more palatable for residents. You know, not complain quite so much about a property tax increase.
I would have to talk to the city manager. We'd have to get that on our work plan, and probably that would be a pretty significant staff research. So I am not opposed to doing that, Fred, but let me talk to the manager and see if he's okay with that. So, if you don't have anything else on the fire side, again, the whole we have in the report is budget recommendations. Does anybody have anything that they want to say in terms of tax rate increases, water sewer increases. Generally, this appears to be, even with a 6.4% increase or 6.4 cent increase in the tax rate, we're still on the taxes and fees lower than a lot of our peers.
I mean, I think it's a reasonable thing to say that, while the increases are unpleasant, they seem fully justified and necessary, and that perhaps even more increases might be needed in the future to help with fire and transit. That's something off the top of my head.
Is there anyone else on the CBAC who shares that sentiment or might have a dissenting opinion to tax increases feeling nice and cozy? Not to take away from you, Fred, but and just want to make sure everybody's on the same page.
No, yeah, it has to be a committee decision.
So Ross, Haysetta, Tony.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay.
I'm okay with that.
Okay. Well, we've got the video here and Janice is taking notes for us. So Fred, we will take the language that you used, distill something very similar into that, and put it into the final report. So you would be approving the report basically subject to that language being added, and staff would add it in a very similar fashion to what you stated.
Yeah, that and adding the dollar amounts too, as
Okay.
footnotes, whatever. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that is everything. Obviously, that's highlighted because this is your meeting today. These again related to that. We will have kind of remove the capital budget piece here and just have the statement about the budget in general with respect to the taxes and fees increases and the overall expenditure increases. Any other questions, comments, concerns, issues, things that you want to bring up with respect to that before we move? Yes, Jamesina.
I just wanted to ask, so whenever Fred will be at the June 11th budget workshop, is the rest of CBAC, do you all ever, I know you go, but does the rest of the committee, the rest of us generally go to any of these things in support, or how does that typically work?
Two responses to that. Generally, no, but it is a public meeting and everyone of you are invited.
Yeah, of course. I was just curious if we've all gone together for any of these things before, or because this is sort of my second year, but it's my very first summer, I think. So I was curious.
So the answer is, I think generally just the chair comes and gives the presentation.
Okay.
But, if any of the other members come, we will kind of recognize that we have other members in the crowd as well. So, and again,
Okay.
you can watch it online. It's on
Right.
TV13,
I saw that.
on YouTube.
Okay. That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Fred, I'll probably be with you online. So
Cool. Very cool.
They're in virtual spirit. Okay, so we will, Fred, I will actually ask you to take a vote on the report there, motion second. And
So
vote.
can we move to approve the report subject to adding the financial information, possibly as footnotes, and that summary of that sentence I gave about the other budget?
Second.
Move.
Move.
All in favor?
I
Aye.
All right, unanimous support. Really next thing on the agenda to talk about, just really quickly, membership turnover. So I did tell you at the beginning, and James, you might not have been here, Sheila gave us her resignation. She just didn't feel she really had the time to allocate and hated missing meetings. That does leave us where we're at with a couple of vacancies. So we're going to work pretty hard here in the summer and early fall with the mayor's office on getting those vacancies filled. There are also technically 3 members, and I think Janice has them, who are either have already had their first term expire or does here soon. And so if we have had that issue, I want to make sure everyone who's up for reappointment also wanted to be reappointed. So I think that's Fred, Ross, and Tony.
I thought I was already reappointed. I'd said I would like to be, so I thought I was.
Okay, we'll go back and check with Linda in the mayor's office and make sure. We have been struggling a little bit to make sure that we've got the right dates and times for everybody for a lot of commissions across the city, but just wanted to make sure if we had to do that everyone was on board, that there wasn't anyone who wanted to leave us, unfortunately. So
I like to be reappointed.
sounds great, Ross. And then I don't know if Tony is still with us or not. We'll send him an email, make sure he's on board too. But we will also get those vacancies filled. CBAC is a 9-member council, and we will do our very best to have 9 members coming into October or November of next year when you begin your work plan again for next year. Having said that, the agenda says next meeting TBD. That next meeting to be determined is probably in the fall. You have approved your report. Fred, we will put together a few slides for you, send them over to you so that you will have some talking points for Tuesday. But other than that, unless you really wanted to meet again, this is probably the end of your tenure. We could come back after council officially adopts the budget and tell you what's in it. But that would be up to you.
Would you mind sending us a report? Then if we could decide to meet, we can decide to have a meeting.
Sure, absolutely. After council adopts, we'll send out kind of I'll give you a 1-pager of what's there. If you feel like that's something that you really need to meet about, and there are a lot of substantial changes, then we'll let you do that at your discretion. All right. Other than that, other questions, comments, concerns, or we are up for adjournment?
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Goodbye, everyone. See you in the fall.
Yeah, thanks for all the work. Shannon.
See you in the fall.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much,
Okay.
everyone.